This episode of Between the Levees is brought to you by Waterways Council, Incorporated, the national public policy organization that advocates for a modern, efficient, reliable, sustainable inland waterways transportation system. As WCI celebrates its 20th year, we serve the operators, shippers, growers, and producers, ports, skill-building trades, and conservation organizations that keep America and her key commodities moving on the inland system in the most environmentally friendly and safe way among surface transportation modes. To learn more about our important work and to join us, visit www.waterwayscouncil.org.
Welcome back to Between the Levees. I'm joined today by Deb Calhoun, the Senior Vice President of Waterways Council, this episode's sponsor. Deb, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
These all began the very same way. Please tell me, where were you born?
I was born in Cleveland, Ohio, 1965. That was a great year. And there's a lot of water in Cleveland, but I knew very little about the inland waterways until much later in my life.
Tell me about life growing up in the mid-60s.
Well, I was actually raised by a single mother. She worked for IBM. My parents had divorced when I was very young. My father was a physician. I grew up in York, Pennsylvania. So born in Cleveland, moved to York, Pennsylvania, and lived all of my life there. And so, it was, at the time, I was the only child in elementary school who had divorced parents. Of course, it's probably flipped now. You probably see far fewer people still married to the same mate. So I never really, took that as something that was a disadvantage to me. My mother was a very strong person. And so, was kind of nose to the grindstone always. So I really credit her a lot for, sort of my work ethic and the rest of my family as well.
Well, what did she do for IBM, and did that prompt the move to Pennsylvania?
She grew up in a small town in Pennsylvania, Chambersburg, Pennsylvania. And so she had started working as a receptionist, I believe, for a hospital there. And that's how she met my father. And then they moved outside of Philadelphia for a while for his residency, and then back to Ohio. And then when they got divorced, she realized that, she needed to do something. So yes, there was a position at IBM in York, Pennsylvania. They had a small office there. Eventually she would be transferred to their Harrisburg operation. But, IBM was an excellent company back in the 60s and, remains to be a great company as well today.
And what did she do for them?
She started just answering the phones, and then became a dispatcher, and then moved up into a couple of other positions. She won a few excellent service awards over the years. So, it was a great sort of role model to have as a woman in a male-dominated industry, if you will.
So you'd have graduated high school in the early 80s, right?
1983, York Suburban High School.
What was life looking like back then for you?
Well, I loved my high school. I was, if you picture a head majorette, I was the head. They called us, but since we were the Trojans, the Fighting Trojans was our football team. I twirled a sword, a makeshift sword, and at homecoming we would duel each other on the football field. So it was a great high school experience. Some of my very best friends are still from my middle school and high school. It was life was pretty easy and great growing up in York, Pennsylvania, for sure.
And did that lead you to college?
Yes, I went to Towson University outside of Baltimore, graduated in 1987. I was an English major with a writing concentration. And then did a couple of classes at Johns Hopkins for my master's. I would love to return to that and finish off my master's, but life sort of got in the way with, with getting married and having kids and my career. So I actually had to reapply to Hopkins and was accepted. So now I have to, go back and try to finish it off at some point, which actually is on my bucket list to do.
Well, what's the master's program in?
It's in writing programs, so writing communications, and I think that's an art that people of this generation, may have gotten a little bit away from. I mean, I just started texting, not that many years ago. And of course, it's, abbreviated and very quick and lots of misspellings. And so I think, writing for me is really what has been the constant throughout my career. I was always in communications, public affairs, public relations, and so media relations. And so I think, having that ability to communicate and write well is the thing that matters the most of all, in my opinion. You can have business acumen and be savvy in business and looking for opportunities to grow your business, but if you can't write and communicate it, that's kind of a lacking. So yeah, it was a great college experience for me for 4 years. Great classes at Hopkins that I've taken, and hope to finish it off and be an even stronger writer in the end.
Well, fill me in on your career development after, I guess you started your master's and then somehow you ended up in the industry.
Yes, I was working in Baltimore. I actually was a reporter. My first job out of college was a newspaper reporter. It was for a weekly called the Baltimore Messenger. And I would cover a number of beats that they had me on. I did the crime beat. So every Monday morning, I'd go to the police station and read the crime reports and follow what was happening within the city of Baltimore and the suburbs of Baltimore. Then they put me on the education beat. So I was an education columnist. There's a number of colleges in the Baltimore area. So that was kind of fun and interesting. And then just became a general assignment reporter. I was writing headlines. I was doing quite a lot of probably what's not even done today in the newspaper business. But it was a great way for me to learn sort of how to be a better writer and how to meet deadlines and how to communicate as best I could in a small amount of space that we had to do so. From there, I moved to Washington, D.C. I became the assistant manager of communications for the Aerospace Industries Association. I kind of split my time between membership, communicating to our members, and they were all the commercial and defense contractors for the aerospace industry. So working with some top names in American business. And then the other half was in media relations. And I really learned so much from my mentor, Alexis Allen. She was the vice president of communications and really learned the art of communicating with the news media. And I had been a reporter, so I could bring that to bear. But understanding how to sell a story, how to give them all the information reporters needed to be able to write a balanced story, to make sure that they understood all the implications of what it was their story was focused on. I learned a tremendous amount from working at the Aerospace Industries Association. It really helped me to go on to other positions throughout my career, working with some of those top aerospace and defense companies, and working with with two fabulous women within the organization. From there, I went to become the manager of communications at a telecommunications association. And that was a brand new position that they had just created. So I was sort of bringing everything in-house that they had sort of done out of house, including a newsletter, all their media relations, all their marketing. From there, I went on to work for the American Waterways operators. I was their director of public affairs. This was in the 90s. Right around the time that I got married in 1992, and then went on to have my sons. Max is 28 and lives in New York City in Manhattan in investor relations. Jack is 25, also living in Manhattan and also doing finance. So I left AIA to have my kids, and the plan was to return, but then I realized there was a lot of travel, a lot of pressure. So I decided I'm going to stay home and try to create my own communications shop, which I did. And so I opened Colbert Communications. At the time, my name was Colbert. And so had a successful, really marine-focused counsel for a number of different companies in the offshore marine industry, marine salvage. Fincantieri was a large international shipbuilder based in Italy. And so they became a client. I was working for a number of salvage companies, individual salvage companies, And then my largest client became Waterways Work, which was the predecessor to Waterways Council, where I'm currently senior vice president.
Oh, you said Waterways Works, was it what it was called?
Yes, Waterways Work was the organization. It was really a campaign that was started in the early 2000s to really focus on a couple of things that were happening within the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. The Corps was getting beaten up pretty much daily by the news media, particularly the Washington Post. There was a reporter by the name of Michael Grunwald who I think made it his mission to try to win an award for writing about all the ways that he felt the Corps was underperforming and doing some other, in his mind, things that were not above board. So every day he would write a nasty story about the Corps. And then other news outlets began to pick that up. Headlines like, the Corps, rotten to the core with a rotten apple core. And so that was a problem because the Corps is the partner that we depend upon and rely upon to be able to maintain and modernize the waterway system. So we felt that we could give some aid there. And also the big reason to start Waterways Work was the fact that all of the commercial operators were paying, at that time, it was a 20-cent per gallon tax into the Inland Waterways Trust Fund for for the fuel burn during operations. That at that time was matched 50-50 by the government. So the Inland Waterways Trust Fund, the balance was growing to over $412 million, while the infrastructure, the locks and dams were, beginning to get worse in their, in so many ways, growing concrete, cracking concrete, essentially, falling into disrepair. So Waterways Work was formed by a number of companies that are still members of Waterways Council today. We solved those problems very quickly. We went to Congress, to those champions that understood the inland waterways. We went to those folks that would be champions and educated them about the fact that this is government bureaucracy holding up funds that could benefit not only the inland waterway system, but also on the media side, we went and met with hundreds and hundreds of editorial boards across the country. Large newspapers, small regional newspapers, weekly, daily newspapers, and really talked about the fact that what is happening in Washington, or what is not happening, we should say, in Washington, this tax is being deposited but not being utilized. And therefore, it is, impeding your ability in, this small town to grow and sustain jobs, to, use your waterfront as waterfront property development, to be able to utilize this really important transportation supply chain. And so we were able to fix the growing surplus in the trust fund, and we got some really good, important, positive stories beginning to flow about the important work of the Corps and just the value of the inland waterway system. From there, because that campaign of Waterways Work was so successful, it grew into a national organization that we know today as Waterways Council Incorporated. That campaign, Waterways Work, became successful, and we merged two regional organizations, Mark 2000, based in the Midwest, and then Dynamo, based in the Pittsburgh area. And we would become then a national organization known as Waterways Council Incorporated, which is who we are today, WCI.
How many locks and dams are you and the Corps trying to manage nationally?
Well, there are about 216 lock sites, over 12,000 navigable miles of inland waterways, but that's too much to get our arms around. The Inland Waterways Users Board is the federally charged advisory board that makes recommendations to Congress about the needs of the inland waterway system. That is composed of companies that are geographically diverse throughout the inland waterway system. Waterways Council just focuses in our own membership on the inland system. So all the way from the top of the system in Minnesota all the way to the Gulf, We don't deal on the West Coast. That's an American Waterways operators focus. So we're just focused on the inland part of the system. However, the users board has representatives from the West Coast as well. And they make recommendations to Congress about those funding needs and just general needs of the inland waterway system. So we've worked very closely with the users board over the years to make sure that we can identify top priority projects throughout the system that are based on risk of failure. You know, how far along are they in the construction process? How much have they been funded? How much needs to be funded to finish them off? Because our goal is not to start projects and let them languish. It's to start projects, have them funded appropriately and efficiently, and have them, you know, cut the ribbon so they can deliver national benefits, you know, to America. So we have worked very closely on a capital investment strategy that looks at the key projects that will require funding. We generally know from the Corps how much funding will be needed to finish them off. And then we Waterways Council works directly with members of Congress on the appropriator side to make sure that each fiscal year the correct full and efficient amount of funding for the Corps to be able to do that work over that fiscal year is appropriated. But we also work on the policy side through authorizers to make sure that policies that are developed, particularly the legislative vehicle we work with is the Water Resources Development Act, WRDA, which is an every 2-year bill. We make sure that the policies that are included in WRDA are appropriate for the inland waterway system and are not, you know, onerously taxing our segment, are looking at ways to bolster the importance of the inland waterways as part of that supply chain.
Did you find yourself surprised or especially interested in this industry when you arrived here?
Well, I said that there's a lot of water in Cleveland. So when I was a small child, I knew nothing about the inland waterways. When I went to interview at the American Waterways operators, I interviewed with a longtime past president, Joe Farrell. And I came in with my navy blue suit that we all wore in the 90s. And I had my briefcase of all of the newsletters and press releases and media articles that I had been involved with. And Joe said, you put all that aside. I know what your skills are. I know what you can bring to our table in terms of media relations and communications. But what I really want to know is how you will fit personality-wise with the rest of our team. We can surely educate you about what is a barge, because frankly, I did not know what a barge really was or what it looked like. And so he said, we will all step up to help you. And really what I want to see is, can you fit within the team? So I was offered that position, and he was surely correct. Everybody from the industry came out to help me. I went to all parts of the system to really understand the challenges on the West Coast, on the East Coast, the Atlantic, what was happening, in the middle of the country all the way down for export. So I got a great education sort of on the ground from those who had been working it for many, many years. And for me, I can communicate that to the news media. And that's really what it all, because there are very few reporters in the country, some of the trade press, but there are very few reporters, especially in a shrinking, media environment, that are covering the inland waterways and very little else. So it helps me to be able to, to boil all that down and be able to explain it in a way that they understand it. So I think it's been pretty successful.
I think you mentioned lock projects are prioritized by chance of failure.
Risk of failure.
Risk of failure. Random question, if you can hazard a response to this one. Bayou Sorrel Lock in Port Allen is different from most others that I'm aware of in the Gulf. What would it cost to replace that lock entirely, to be widened to fit a full tow, a full 6-pack through?
Right. I don't know exactly what the final cost will be, but I can report that there is some good activity happening in Bayou Sorrel. In fact, during the FY24 appropriation cycle in the House, which has been completed and the Senate is underway, hopefully we will get a bill done before the end of the fiscal year on September 30. Garrett Graves, a member of Congress from Louisiana, has contributed or is going to put forth about $800,000 to look at Bayou Sorrel and how we can move that project forward in FY24. So good things are happening there. We've been, I think, very critical. WCI has been really critical in looking for those opportunities, both to, start the process by studying the lock and figuring out, how can we get this, to completion or to fruition, or at least in process. And so Garrett Graves has been a great champion, along with so many others in all the states that have these priority projects. So things are going to be moving forward on Bayou Sorrel, which is a really positive development.
And is the plan to replace it entirely?
I think, yes, the plan is to replace it. We're far from that right now. We have to sort of study it and see what the options are. Ultimately, there are people who would say just rehab some of these projects, but really that doesn't get you to, building an additional lock to give you additional capacities. Should the 600-foot, chamber fail, we need a 1,200 modern lock, adjacent to give some redundancy should that antiquated 600-foot chamber fail. Some of them were built without understanding, how traffic is moving. So, some of the gates, in some of the areas around the Southwest Pass have been an issue. So we are looking at, today and into the future. And so we need to really look at modernizing, rebuilding, building again function, so that these things will function far into the future. So rehabbing them doesn't really get you there. What we're really focusing on is to build additional capacity and to be ready for all of the commodities that we see ahead.
Well, that just about does it for my questions. Do you have anything else to share before we conclude here?
I don't, other than to say that it has been truly so much to me to be part of this industry. Everybody's been such a great teacher and mentor to me. There are more and more women in the industry today than there ever have been. So I'm really, really inspired by that. I received the National Achievement Award back in 2019 from the National Rivers Hall of Fame. Just went to see my name in lights, if you will, at the National Mississippi River Aquarium and Museum in Dubuque. And so I just feel humbled every single day to be able to work for this industry and to communicate something that I'm really so passionate about. So thank you for the opportunity to talk about it today.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Talk to you soon.
This has been a production of Where You At Studios, LLC.